All right, everybody, we're back here now for another episode of Thriving on Mission. I'm the show's host, Matt Rogie, and with me as well is producer Quinn Harris. What's up, Quinn?
What's going on?
That's
what's
so
not
funny.
going on.
Right, what's not going on right now. Oh, yeah. It's funny, for the listeners, you and I we've been talking for probably about the past 20 minutes or so. Man, it's a crazy time what we're living in right now because today's April 8th, I think, something like that. And so, for the United States, we've been pretty much about a month now of dealing with COVID-19. And, most people, are under some type of stay-at-home order, mandate, rule right now, either from the state or county or city officials here. And, who would have thought?
Yeah, it's definitely the craziest time since I've been alive.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah.
I know that your experiences, some were probably crazier, but it's been a long time since something like this has happened worldwide.
Right.
Kind of deal. So.
Yeah, definitely. I was talking with my wife and I think I made, mention a comment to my son about, he's about to graduate from college.
Yeah.
And, so he's going to graduate, in the middle of this pandemic. They're finishing up their classes online right now, with obviously a large economic impact to the whole world. So he's planning to stay for another year and finish his master's, but and again, it can feel like a gut punch in a way.
Yeah.
For a lot of people. Well,
yeah.
Which is understandable. So, but hey, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad I was able to get into the studio today and, have my temperature taken when I was coming in.
Yeah.
I'm good to go. My wife and I, we've been pretty much, doing like everybody else, staying at home.
Yeah.
I've been doing some work for our church, especially, within the missions department. And it's been a little crazy with that too. So
what I did want to ask you, what does different military deployment and stuff like that look like right now? Do you know?
No, I've read a couple things, from either Stars and Stripes or Army Times, or the subreddits for the military branches, and either the redeployments have basically stopped for the time being, or I know for a while when they were bringing guys back from overseas, they would put them in quarantine for 2 weeks, and you can imagine that the military, you're not being put up in a 5-star hotel. So, the guys would literally go from one environment of maybe even living better some places in Afghanistan, but then coming back and living in tents for a couple of weeks when they come back, which can be very stressful in of itself.
Yeah.
But, obviously, there's still the mission going on.
Yeah.
And, so they're having to adjust and see what that looks like. But I think I read too that, even in Afghanistan, they've got some soldiers who have been diagnosed with, COVID-19. Yeah. And so it's crazy.
Yeah, it's rough. I listened to a pretty interesting podcast last week on intelligence operatives and kind of what they're doing right now in the Middle East and different, places like that. And, it pretty much sounded like they're able to do nothing, basically.
Yeah. Because you can't go out, you can't, meet people.
Yeah.
And because that's where you can create that genuine relationship.
Yeah.
And again, I know, churches, are really trying to figure out what that looks like right now too, right?
Yeah.
Because it's all about relationship and trust.
Yeah.
And, that was, one thing at Compassion, and again, I think this is affecting churches everywhere. If you have missionaries, I think we've had 4 families return from overseas because of this pandemic. Once the State Department issued that level 4 alert and the governments in these countries where they were at, they started talking about lockdowns and more restrictions on foreigners. They felt it would, safer, not necessarily because of the disease, but just again, in those places where they're at, these governments are already unstable.
Yeah.
And now you're going to throw in these lockdowns and it could just become sheer chaos. And they weren't doing anything anyway. Because they were stuck at home.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. I watched a lot of Al Jazeera. So some of the stuff, that I've seen, like orders and stuff coming from different nations and
Yeah.
stuff it's been interesting. Assad is trying to get everybody to stop fighting, and some some extremist leader, I'm not sure who, I can't remember who they said it was, but had called off like terrorist attacks in different parts of Europe and stuff like that where it was bad. It was
Interesting.
it was very interesting to listen to some of that stuff. So
Right. Yeah. We could go down the rabbit hole of the whole conspiracy theory of this is a perfect time for.
I'm good. I'm good, man.
All right.
Oof.
All right.
I'm good on that. Like I was telling you before, it's like I'm at the point where I don't even know what to think about it, or
Sure.
Yeah,
I get it. Yeah. And for anybody that probably already has a tendency to, or has deals with excess anxiety and fear and depression, it can even take you down to a much darker path. I think which is one of the things I wanted to talk about today a little bit was maybe we can frame it around this idea of resiliency, being resilient, and especially in a time like this.
Yeah.
And again, everybody's going through different situations economically, physically, spiritually, mentally right now, and for the most part here in the United States, just because of, the economy we have, and even in the healthcare, the incredible job that all the healthcare professionals are doing right now. We've got it better than other places in the world by far, but still people are dealing with stuff.
Oh.
And especially the isolation. And, from somebody who knows that that's sort of my default go-to as far as an unhealthy coping technique to isolate myself, you could definitely understand how, even now it's hard for people to get to that healthy spot because, just like, you and I, this is the first time I've had a conversation with somebody outside of my wife, which I love, by the way, but, just to hang out with another guy and just talk for a few minutes. Yeah. And because there is something that I appreciate about that we're designed that way, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so, now obviously now we have the opposite going on to where it's more difficult and, or if not impossible, if you want to stay healthy, if you want to obey the law, those types of things. So, I thought a couple of weeks ago, it was before we did the lockdown or stay-at-home orders for the city of Savannah, but a friend of mine who's a pastor, he had just relayed a story to me of somebody that he knew, a veteran, post-traumatic stress, and tried to commit suicide. And it was just heartbreaking because by that point in the situation, the hospitals were not letting visitors in.
Yeah.
And so you've got a guy who had tried to commit suicide and he's now in the hospital by himself, and it's a casualty of this whole situation. And I'm sure, that there are stories like that happening, all over in that regards of, people are, even they might even welcome, a face-to-face conversation, and, it could be something that could save somebody's life. So,
yeah, there's a comedian that I follow. He was talking about it because he had just gotten out of the hospital. He was diagnosed with COVID-19 and regular pneumonia at the same time.
Wow.
And I ended up having to stop listening to it because it just sounds like a nightmare, man. He was like, they tell you, like, whenever you get to the hospital, like, hey, this is either going to go real good real fast or real bad real fast. But we'll tell you one thing right now, like, you're not going to see nobody the whole time. So,
yeah,
just prepare yourself for it. And it's
right.
Just, ugh.
Right. Yeah. So that idea of being resiliency, there was this article I was reading about it, but they defined resiliency as the ability to recover quickly. And that idea of, 2020 is completely different from how we all thought it was going to look. And hopefully, and I think, optimistically, we could look at 2021 will be different. We'll be coming out hopefully on the other side of this, even though it'll still be a while till they have vaccines available. But as far as maybe treatment and, that herd immunity, however that looks, we have to look and go, all right, 2021 will be different. And so, this question of, I was asking myself this morning is, what do I want 2020 then to represent?
Yeah.
And because it's a question, we had a plan for 2020. Everybody did in some form or another. My wife and I, for the past couple of years, we've actually been spending some time together at the beginning of the year and coming up with a plan. And nothing, super detailed, but, some things we wanted to accomplish.
Yeah.
And some of it was maybe places we wanted to visit, people we wanted to spend more time with, physical goals, spiritual, mental goals. And some of that's changed just by, being at the stay-at-home stuff for basically a month now.
Yeah.
And so I just realized the fact that, while we've crossed stuff off the calendars, we haven't sort of reevaluated and said, all right, let's take a look at this. What, in light of all this, what's going to be different? Because, we want to bounce back. I mean, that's our desire. We want to come out on this other side stronger. And, there's a versus coming out 20 pounds heavier with, Dorito crumbs all in my beard.
Yeah.
and have binge watched everything on Netflix, and so how can we recover well out of this? And again, that's going to look different from everybody. And so, she doesn't know it yet, but we'll sit down at some point later on this week and sort of talk about what that looks like. Because I think it was yesterday, I had a meeting with our church's mission department, and we were talking about, because again, churches are affected by this everywhere. We know that, because the economy is down and because people are understandably afraid of what's going to happen to their jobs, and the stock market's, crashed by over 30%, giving to the churches are down as well. And, granted, we don't have a crystal ball, but we can probably look at least a month or 2 months ahead and just go, all right, let's make some decisions based upon what that looks like.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing with, with our lives right now. We can make a decision. What does it look like to, if I'm in, if we're still stayed home for another month, I want to come out on the other side of that better.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to look at and go, oh, what if we're in this for a year? Well, we'll cross that bridge if we come to it. But, and I think a lot of that, especially for vets with post-traumatic stress, I've talked to a couple other guys, just either FaceTime or on the phone, and, there's a lot of similarities going on. And I think, we were talking a little bit earlier, and knowing your story, just it's so easy to slip into a mode now because the rest of the world is almost encouraging.
Yeah.
Hey, be anxious, be afraid.
Yep.
We try not to, my wife and I have done a pretty good job of avoiding the news other than like once a day, because it is important to be informed. But, but basically when the world is telling you to be afraid, and we need to take precautions, we need to, take care of ourselves and the ones we love. But at the same time, we know that's what the media feeds off of.
Yep.
And so, so I think, we need to have a plan, because it's going to change. This year's changing for all of us. We're going to look back on 2020, the history books, just like in 2001 when 9/11 happened. That changed the world completely.
Yeah.
And so here in 2020, the world's going to change, and it is changing right now. And so how do we define it? How do we look at 2020 and say, granted, people might lose their jobs. There might be health, there might be deaths in the family, or things like that. But at the same time, I don't want to look back on 2020 and say, oh, woe is me.
Yeah.
Because I'm really good at that.
Yeah.
And again, that's one of the things, for vets with post-traumatic stress, is we live in the past. We live with that identity of things that had happened and the feelings we've experienced. And that's not who we are.
Yeah.
Our identity is something else.
Yeah.
And so we have the ability now to make a decision. What is that going to look like? And I've talked about that before. Maybe that's just the decision you're going to wake up in the morning when you put your feet on the ground you get out of bed. Well, what's that day going to look like for you? That's going to be 2020 as it changes. It's this year of change for both, for economics, your physical health, your mental health, your spiritual health. And so it's important for us to come up with that plan. And, and I would encourage people who are listening, write something down, because I think a lot of us have good ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that like times like this, should be taken advantage of to, do something productive, basically. Like that's how I've been trying to look at it more than anything. Can I take this opportunity? I'm, for the time being, we're still working,
right?
But I'm not going out and about as much or eating out and stuff like that. So, I've just been trying to figure out what I can be doing, in the midst of all this. But I'm sure that the feeling that you're talking about is pretty similar to, stuff that I feel like I live a lot of times with these memories of a past life, it feels like, and sometimes that stuff is hard to get rid of, especially, I've gone through times with this coronavirus thing that, some days I'm more anxious than others. Some days I get caught up in, I went to the store, I touched this, but now I take my glove off and I touch this and this. How does this even, at the end of it, there's no way for me to not touch something that's been touched by somebody else in some form or another. And it is, it's a rough time to try and figure that out. So I think this is a good one for this.
Yeah. So, I think I encourage, people should sort of evaluate and like you said, use the time that they have, to make something better.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just their thought process, and just, it's funny, our church, their series starting, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks ago, was basically on anxiety.
Yeah.
And, very well timed. And, and again, that idea of, anxiety and fear, it comes from, things, thoughts about things that aren't real. Really, because, my anxiety stems from things that could have happened or, what if, what if I had died? What if we had gotten shot up that night or, reliving those memories, but they can't hurt me now, and so same thing, with this, it's an anxiety of what if I touch that? What if it's there? What if I get it? And there's prudence and then there's, fear that's not rational. In that end. A friend of ours right now, she's working from home. She lives just down the street from us, Cindy. And she told my wife the other day, because we see her walking by our house pretty much all the time. Not all the time, but twice a day.
Yeah.
And so she's made it a point to where she'll work for a certain amount of time in the morning, and then she gets up and goes walks for 45 minutes, exercise. And then she comes back, works for the rest of the afternoon and then goes out and does it again. And, part of it, physical health, but it's also a mental health, a tool because, otherwise you're going to go crazy.
Yeah.
I'm finding that if I don't get up from the computer and step away and go outside, and especially, we've had some great weather here in Savannah.
Yeah.
There was a day I think I had, it was one Zoom call after the other. And I've heard that from a lot of people. Zoom is both the good guy and the bad guy right now. But, when your day is nothing but Zoom calls, there's no satisfaction in that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, my girlfriend and I we decided to go for a walk the other day and found a hiking trail that had been made behind my apartment complex that I didn't even know existed.
Awesome.
We've been living there for 3 months. So that's something that's good. I'm not the type of person that I'll stay inside all day,
right.
So this has been one of those things that, for me and her, she likes to go outside. So it's getting me out and about a bit, it's so good stuff can happen from it. I think that one of my favorite things that I'm seeing happening through this whole thing is with the homeschooling, the transition to homeschool for, it seems like almost everybody. I have a lot of family and friends that I grew up with that are, they work in the education system, and all the teachers, it seems like, they're posting videos of what their kids are doing with homeschooling, and none of it is anything that they would be doing in school. It's like, we're going to learn how to like bake brownies, or, we're going to do like archery in the backyard and stuff like that. And so I think people adapt, And so although it is an anxious time, it's something that, if people can gain the right perspective, they can adapt to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely think so. And I think there's also a lot of people that are realizing that they don't want to be homeschooled anymore.
Yeah.
Or they don't want to do homeschooling anymore. And I get it. That was probably never my gift either. So, but we're out of that season now.
Yeah.
So, So as just as we go forward, I think, there's a podcast that I listen to as well called The One Thing. And there's a book, and, like a lot of other, I guess, self-help / productive genre type books, how to improve your life, those types of things. One of the things they always ask, what's one thing you can do to make things better, and try not to break it. Try not to say, all right, well, that means I'm going to start exercising more.
Yeah.
And that's a great thing, obviously, but that's a pretty broad stroke right there, exercise more. So what does that mean? What does that look like? And so what they really encourage people to do, and that's something, again, my wife and I have tried to embrace more of this thought process of, what's something small that I can do that I can call a win. And so, for my wife right now, she is, just doing one set of exercises is her one thing. Because what she's found is that if she does just one set of these exercises, she's more likely to do 3 sets or 4 sets. And then she's more likely to go out for a run. Yeah. It's sort of that same thing, but then there's some days to where it's just like, it takes everything you can to do that one thing. Yeah. And that's okay. Yeah. But, you're training yourself, you're training your brain, ultimately to build habits is really what it comes down to. And, so again, as we come out of, as we're in the middle of this right now, what can we do? I've got a stack of note cards on my desk of, little things that I've been writing down of like things I want to do or try, or, not so much a to-do list, but just some ideas. And what I found over the past 3 weeks is that stack of cards has been getting bigger and bigger. And I haven't really gone back and said, all right, how can I implement this? Yeah. How can I attack this? And so all I see when I go to my desk is a stack of cards getting bigger and bigger, and it becomes overwhelming. Yeah. And so actually last night I started to sit down and sort of go through them and, and either say, nope, not going to do that. Or, yeah, this is something I want to pursue. What's the next action step I can take? And start prioritizing some of those things. And again, 99% of that is a mental game.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's, for those of us, if we don't have the virus, that's what it comes down to. This is all a mental game in some respects. And again, we know that there's people out there who've already lost their jobs, especially here in Savannah with the service industry, with the hotels, the restaurants, the bars. A lot of people are struggling financially right now.
Yeah.
And of course, that's something that is going to bring a lot of stress and anxiety. And, thankfully, I've seen lots of great resources out there, both for the school systems to feed, they're still doing school lunches and breakfast for the kids right now here in Chatham County. And I think in the surrounding counties too. But there's also been some other great resources. I know churches have stepped up with, as far as offering food, Second Harvest, which is, I think that's just for the Low Country area here in Savannah. They're always having food available. And there's another ministry called PAC, and they provide, again, same thing, bags of food for kids who normally wouldn't have it. So just, side note right there.
They're also still, our outreach staff was in here this morning. They went and did a pickup from Second Harvest. So Second Harvest is actually still supplying smaller distributors as well, which is pretty good.
That's awesome. and thankfully, and again, people are still able to give financially, because obviously those organizations, they do require money to get this food.
Yeah.
And, so it's awesome that people are still giving what they can,
Yeah.
and again, that shows the resiliency of people.
Yeah, it does. I always find it fascinating with kind of these, I'm from Louisiana, so, where I'm from deals with hurricanes
Right.
every year, big ones.
Mm-hmm.
And so every time that there's some kind of, I don't know what you want to call this, natural disaster, whatever type thing, the unity of communities.
Yeah.
There was a flood in my hometown, including like my parents' house had like 4 feet of water in it. This was a few years ago now. And at the time, there had been a lot of like protests and riots and stuff happening in Baton Rouge. And after that happened, man, everybody just came together. And after the flood happened, and those things never started back up. I find it fascinating, the unity, that some of this stuff can bring, to people.
Definitely.
It's weird.
My wife and I were talking about that, and and again, she goes back to 9/11, which again, there was that unity that occurred to where people would talk to more each other. You would interact more with your neighbors. You would, you appreciated life a little bit more. And, obviously, the big difference between this is, having a face-to-face interaction is so much more difficult now, though, with people.
Yeah.
And, and again, we will. There is an end to this at some point.
Yeah.
And again, optimistically, because of just, again, who we are as people, and, situational, get solved.
Yeah.
So I would just encourage, for my listeners, if anybody's listening to this right now, just think about that. What's one thing they could do differently? Quinn, what's one thing, you don't have to answer this now, but maybe, something to think about. Is there one thing we can do differently? And then people they can put a comment, they can shoot me an email, Facebook comment, whatever, is there one thing, or if they're having trouble figuring out what that looks like, send me a message, and I'd be happy to talk to somebody, again, I'm craving that personal interaction. I was, right before we started this, I was, Jim had just introduced me to a ranger that goes to this church. And it was just great to meet somebody new, and just, little fellowship, little camaraderie, and hey, all right, once this is over, let's go ahead and get coffee. And I think, once this does get over, coffee shops are going to be booming, parks, all those types of activities where people can congregate together for just social reasons. It's going to explode.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, yeah, I think so too. It's always funny listening to like the press briefings that Trump is doing, and he keeps saying like it's going to be back bigger than ever, and it's like it is.
Yeah.
It is for sure. Just because of that, just because of what you're talking about.
Right.
People, like, we're made for community and stuff like that, and we're in a situation where, we can't have that. And then you think about all the people stuck in their houses with their kids, like, the streets are going to be flooded whenever this thing's over.
Right, right.
So I will tell you, the biggest thing that I've learned through this thing so far is that you do save money making your own food.
Oh, yeah.
And so I had this philosophy for the longest time of, it was basically like, look, I'm not really saving that much of anything. Like, I still have to pay for the food that I'm going to cook, And so, and I do cook. I'm a pretty good cook, but so I would eat out whenever I wanted to. But I mean, I've saved tons of money not doing that, just cooking at home and eating on stuff for a few days. So that's a good thing. Yeah,
definitely. My wife and I were talking about that, just spending money in general.
Yeah.
We're not using gas. For us, we don't have to travel anywhere. I think a lot of people are experiencing that right now, but also just in general, there's, most people are not buying extraneous stuff right now because they're just wait and see. Let's see what's going to happen. Understandable, and so we did the no spend February challenge, to where we were just going to, back in February, we were just going to spend basically just what we needed, food, necessities, things like that. Not order anything from Amazon or, things like that. Don't eat out. Just a fun challenge for us to do. And now, here March and into April, it's almost a forced no spend, just because again, there's,
Yeah. I think that, I think that this thing is just, or what I'm hoping is that it'll put a lot of things back into perspective. It'll, we're kind of in a situation where we don't have the instant gratification that we usually do. I shop Amazon Prime, and I ordered, just a little toy, a gift to send to my best friend's son the other day. And it's like, hey man, it's Prime shipping, but it's not getting there till April 26th.
Right.
And so you don't get to press a button and things materialize in front of you.
Yeah.
Like you used to do.
Exactly.
So,
you go to the stores and some things are not on the shelves anymore, or they're only letting in a certain amount of people at a time. And so you have to sit and wait.
Yeah. Which is interesting. We have a missionary that she's been a part of our church for a long time, but she's a missionary in Rome, Italy. And she was, they were saying, I don't remember if it was her having a conversation with someone, but somebody in conversation with someone from over there connected to her. They were talking about how, like, there, if you go to the supermarket, normal, like there's not an excess amount of canned goods and stuff like that, like there is here. Like sometimes you go there and there's not, the shelves aren't full, like whenever you're at Walmart. You can't stock up on toilet paper if you wanted to.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. We take a lot for granted.
Oh yeah,
believe,
definitely.
Especially, in this country.
Definitely. Sure. Funny thing on that, as we'll sort of close out with this thought. When you said that, it reminded me when we were living in Cyprus, and it was similar to where, the stores wouldn't necessarily have a large selection, and then sometimes they wouldn't even have it.
Yeah.
Just because, one, you're living on an island, so sort of at the whims of the shipping and the boats. But, there would be times where you'd go to the store and you couldn't get peanut butter. And it wasn't even real peanut butter. It was British peanut butter, which is not, and so, it was something you learned to deal with, and it was just normal.
Yeah.
But then we come back to the States, and the first time we walk down the peanut butter aisle at the store, you're like overwhelmed, because not only do they have like good peanut butter, but there's multiple types of peanut butter.
Yeah.
And so we're experiencing a little bit of that that shortage right now.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, hey, great to be back in the studio this week. Glad to be here. And, again, for our listeners, please, go visit the website. I'm getting some great comments, some feedback on the shows and on Facebook. If you think somebody else will appreciate this message, I hope they'll get out there and share it with somebody else, whether share this video or just, tell somebody about something they learned. So, all right, man. Well, we'll see you next week, Quinn.
Yeah. See y'all later.
All right.